And then will that be on a YouTube post? Okay, so just so that we could get I always go back and listen. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so I have a couple questions. First of all, it would be great if we could get the updated study with the change of I think they had Walmart in there as part of the one mistake in there. If we could get that, that would be great. And then when you referenced the Housing Institute meeting, was this the group that was meeting that you were going to maybe try to get the minutes for? You guys were going to meet, and we were supposed to get a list of who those stakeholders were that were meeting within this group.
Yep, and so minutes are difficult because there isn't like a minute taker. There's notes that are taken. It's really more conversations that are had. So this sheet here that has the MHP stuff on it, I put this together just kind of as an informational guide of what the Minnesota Housing Partnership is doing in terms of this institute. And what it is it's a conglomerate of communities in the region that are meeting to just talk really all things housing. There's presentations that are given to us about housing, about development, about affordability, about just a host of things that deal with housing. And those videos are available. I can make them available to you. The key stakeholders are, let's see, where does it say in here? We've got teams from, city government, county government, HRAs, EDA staff, local businesses, nonprofits, school, healthcare administrators. So getting the list.
Could you get a little more specific? I'm trying to understand what this group is, if it's just loosely, is an invitation, can anyone attend, who is presenting? Is it a coalition? Is it gonna come forward with recommendations? And I've asked for this in the past and haven't received, I still quite am not wrapping my head around what it is.
And I wasn't entirely either until I actually went to the training. I'd been to a few meetings, but the training was really about having local government. So there's different cities there, and like I said, there are some county entities there. And staff and state, I think it was mostly staff from like city government that were there.
Like what, like Virginia, Evelyn, Mount
Evelyn, Mount Iron, Tower, Deer River. I think there was a presenter was there from Cloquet. So, I mean, it's a large region. So they call it the Housing Institute 9, and it's the regional. There's the East Range Joint Powers Board is one of the kind of cohorts that are there, and it was an application that was put in before I started with the city, so that's why it's a little new to me, so I'm sorry if I am having a little trouble explaining some of it and the back history, but it's really to provide whatever the needs are of kind of the institute or the cohorts within the institute. So what I want to call a cohort or team right now, there isn't like an end plan that we're at yet. What we're doing is we're information gathering. In other institutes, let's say it's just one city specific, I think they've come up with like a development plan for something to happen within that city. We're not there yet in this group. It's more about just collaboration with the Quad Cities. So the group that I'm a part of is, Virginia, Mountain Iron, Gilbert, and Evelyn. So those are kind of the players. The mayor was at, I think, one of the first meetings just to kind of generally talk about, and some of the other mayors have been invited. And it's really, from my perspective, at this point in time, information gathering and
Okay, so then if I don't mean to interrupt you, Jenny, I'm still trying to understand who is sponsoring. If it's called an institute, who is the sponsor overall of the program?
Minnesota Housing Partnership.
So this is an MHP which has certain criteria that they would like to meet within the state of Minnesota, and they focus primarily on affordable housing or all housing? Because I believe their focus is affordable housing.
There's a focus on affordable housing, and I had maybe a perception that would be all, but it wasn't. like, at least the first one wasn't all about affordable housing. So there definitely is information tacked onto here about affordable housing.
Yep.
Because that is a lens that they have, but it's, from my experience so far, isn't the sole lens.
Okay, and so I think from, and I'm glad we're, I guess, maybe starting to have this conversation. I think this is great. And where I had some conversations about our housing study that we just received back. And I think it's an interesting question when you said, I'm looking for maybe some direction as to how to move forward. I really feel like we need to get together and answer a few questions. What the main question that I can kind of see after talking to a few folks that are in this arena or in this space is, what do we want to see? Where do we want to see Virginia in 20 years? What does that look like? Is it tourism? Is it biking trails, hiking trails? What is it? What is the overall, what do we want Virginia to look like? How does the impact of our new public safety center impact our housing? How does the impact of our new school impact our housing? And look at that and add 20 years. And what would we like to see coming forward in 20 years? And instead of kind of being, and I appreciate you're in a fact-finding stage and an information gathering stage, but I feel at some point, each administration in our Minnesota government, as they come and go, are going to have different focuses. And whether it's on one political side of the aisle or another, they're going to have different focuses or emphasis. Right now, the emphasis is on affordable or workplace housing, and our state is throwing a lot of grant dollars towards these types of programs. So when I think about an institute or a consortium or a cohort, I'm thinking that this is the focus is being driven based on what is happening administratively in the state of Minnesota, instead of what actually do we need to have happen here in our community of Virginia, Minnesota. And I love the fact that there's other players coming, to talk about land usage or housing strategies. But the reality is neither Virginia, Evelyn, or Mountain Iron are landlocked the way that Virginia is. And Virginia has a very unique property set in terms of what we actually do have available and how do we really want to use those resources, and how wisely we need to actually have a vision. And I would think that 20 years going forward, saying what do we want our community to look like, and then from that, answer that question, and then from there would stem your housing strategy needs, instead of just here's money that right now is happening in our state, and that's a great thing, don't get me wrong. But when the focus becomes based on money is being thrown at something, it doesn't necessarily focus on what actually our community's needs are. So I love the fact that you're saying you'd like some direction and leadership, and I apologize for taking so long, but I think what I've kind of envisioned is basically what the mayor had begun stating and asking or requesting, and I feel like John Sullivan had started on the journey with the available land tracts. He had gone to with Matt Reed from SEH, and actually I think they had I don't know if they had a developer look, but they had like, here's ledge rock, it's going to cost $300,000. Yep. So maybe start building on that portion. What I would do is kind of what we did with the big maps at the end of Chestnut Street. We found out who all the landowners were. So I would do a big map, print a big map, and then have, Jenny, I don't know if you've ever, I'm sure you have the clear overlay sheets. You can have printed clear. You can print on clear laminated sheets, and you can put those over. So if we say, this looks like a senior condominium townhome over here, mixed with $100,000 to $200,000 range homes, mixed with $300,000 to $500,000 homes here, whatever that looks like, you've got different layers that you can put those over and play around with your available land tracts, if that makes sense. So I'm just looking to maybe more have like a working session of where we could sit down, but I'd like to have that map strategy and then even one plain clear that we could take dry erase markers, which I think we did that at the very beginning of, well, I know I did it at the very beginning of the strategic planning for Rock Ridge School, and that was very, very helpful when they just let us go and kind of scribble our ideas on a clear overlayment. Maybe that is expensive, I don't know. But it was very helpful just to watch everyone get creative. And also when we were starting to brainstorm for the Iron Trail Motors Event Center and had it in the North Room at the old Miners Building. That was extremely helpful. Along with our comprehensive study, we did that same kind of exercise. So, and just in closing, I'm sure there'll be more conversation, but in closing, I reached out to Apurva, who is our hotel developer, and I asked him, you know, I'd like to understand a little bit more about some of these definitions and some of the funding that's attached with some of these definitions. And are these definitions really important for funding attachment? And what Mr. Patel had stated is if we do have a working session, he would be willing and would welcome, or he would be willing to come and have a discussion with us, a working session with us, with all of his, I guess, I'd call it his expertise in development, both in commercial and residential, along with townhome and senior living. He's got experience from Red Wing, Minnetonka, to our area. Where else does he have? He's quite Duluth. He's got quite a vast array. So if we were to, I think my recommendation would be to put a working session together, and you know, there's a lot of players that are coming forward. I feel that this is my just personal feeling that there is an agenda, and the agenda is because there's money being handed out at the state level. And instead of being influenced by an agenda, I want to see what we have available. I feel like we're smart enough people to sit down together and brainstorm and come up with solutions that make sense for our community and our constituents. But so I would rather not have outside influencers coming into that working session. I would like to use Mr. Patel more as a professional who would understand terminology and would be able to answer any questions without having any motivation other than just to help us understand and not be a part of any lobbying group at all. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Paulson. Councilor Motley.
I don't know if there's much left after. Thank you, Councilor Paulson. And I also agree with the mayor on finding land. Let us know the land on where we can develop. That's going to play a big part. I personally would love to see more senior housing development in Virginia. And just because I live in Midway, I'm starting to see the impact of the new school. And it is without a doubt getting busier. And I feel like I'm starting to see more kids around. I would love to see us focusing on single-family housing up in Midway, where the old school is. And I just kind of want to replay this, just a short blurb here from the recommendations of our newly updated housing study, which absolutely recommends, on page 162, it is in the opinion of HCA that single-family housing is needed in Virginia market in any form. The largest gap seems to be in the range of 250,000 to 400,000. It is highly recommended that community leaders invest time and effort into growing this price range of homes. And because of this, I'm going to be pushing for this. Otherwise, why did we update our study? It's literally laying it out for us. So senior housing, and I would love to see development in Midway for families with the new school. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Motley. Councilor Beyondich.
And yes, I'll tack on to Councilor Paulson at League of Minnesota Cities. They recommended that we not look at next year, that we do need to be looking at further out. And with our elderly, and I consider myself in that group, that the housing that we will be needing to move out of our house, to open that up to families. I mean, we're sitting in family homes and our kids are gone. And they really stress that we do not keep this short-sighted. Anything that we're looking at for our city be looked at in a 5, 10, 15, 20-year out. So we can make that plan. So that was one of the things that came out of the league for me. Also, just speaking to residents in town and speaking to those that have left our town, it just breaks my heart that they have lived here all their life and they can't find housing when they're elderly. So I would highly focus on that, and I like the idea of working just for our city, not as a whole, but what does Virginia need? It doesn't matter what anybody else right now. We're looking at what we have for land and the best use for that land for the people that live here, grew up and lived here and want to stay here. So that's kind of my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Beyondich. For me, I agree with everything that has been disseminated here and requesting that we have any additional meetings moving forward. This is kind of the baseline meeting to get us off the ground to move into the directions that you're asking us where we go. So for me, it's like the four-legged stool. Market rate of housing, which is single-family homes, okay, as recommended by the study. Secondly, market rate townhouses and condominiums, which would include working condominiums for families and for those who are retirees, senior housing as well. And so the other piece of that, if it's not townhouses or condominiums, it's senior housing complexes as well. And then the other one is the affordable housing moving forward, or workforce housing, and what those terminologies mean with respect to what's voucher housing, what isn't voucher housing. And for me, it's not what a developer wants. A developer can come to our community and say, I want that piece of property. I will build you this kind of housing on there. But in order for me to get the financing I need in order to build that property, I have to go to the Minnesota Housing Finance through the SPIN in Minnesota. In order to get that money, I have to provide some multi-use housing, which would include a market rate, workforce housing, and then homeless transition housing. That's not what I think we should be looking for. That's part of a four-legged stool. But when you look at some of these other communities that have those already, like Duluth and Moorhead and Rochester, and even Grand Rapids now is building one, they have a larger population, number one. They already have a lot of senior housing. They already have a lot of single-family housing. They have a lot of market rate housing that they can sell. They don't have the old housing stock of Virginia. They are not landlocked like Virginia. So our focus has to be on what's in the best interest for Virginia in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years down the road, and how that housing can help us to be more economically stable in the future to attract families, individuals, and keep seniors here. And so part of that process is for us to determine that. And for that, from that meeting I went to with that housing summit, I went there for information gathering. I think that's what you're there for as well. We are not, and we have not directed you, and I don't think we have any desire to commit to to this process of the housing finance issue and going by the recommendation of this housing summit. That I think the idea is just to gather information, find out what's out there, what developers are available, what can be built, and then we decide as a council based on information you provide from that housing stuff, what's available, what other people are doing, what the IRRB might be doing. And so, not to belabor this any further, but I did have a conversation today with Al Bechica, which is the Assistant Commissioner of the IRRB. Commissioner Rukavina couldn't be at that meeting today, but her focus and the focus of the IRRB is going to be about housing. What kind of housing do you want to build? It could be a variety of housing. The purpose is to make sure we provide housing for working families, for housing for people who work here, who live here, and who do this for the long term. It's not a transitional piece of housing, because that part of the housing market, from my perspective, based upon my conversation, is that's already being there. You got the range trenches and housing already building those kind of things. We're helping them do that, but we're not committing funding. We're not committing property to that. That's property that they bought and own. But the property that we have to be, I think, clearly careful or really vet out what kind of housing we want. And so it has to be a tax-paying entity, it has to generate revenue, it has to provide what the people need to maintain, whether it's senior housing or whether it's workforce housing or whether it's, single-family home, whatever it is. I think that's what should be our focus. Yes, we have all those housing that are available, and there might be a need one way or the other, but having this meeting, what are our priority? What is the priority that we want? And that's what we have to set for you. But first finding out what land's available, and then we can determine what we can do moving forward, what's available, and then start marketing that property. I think it was wise. I know that there was some significant discussion and angst in some respects over the purchase of the property up in Midway from a private party, but it's close to the school. And I know John Sullivan did some work up there looking at homes at about $300,000, but those were large, big parcels. That was just an example of what could be built there. But there are other opportunities within that structure, along with the old Midway school site that could be, that's a huge potential, particularly with the school there. So I don't think workforce housing and voucher housing is the way to go in those areas. So I'm looking forward to looking at the property that's available and having that conversation about what's best suits our community for the long term. So thank you. Councillor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Since this is a special meeting, I think maybe what I'll do is move to schedule a working session with the council and invite Apurva Patel. And I would say, I don't know if I need to include this in my motion, Pam. Do I need a time frame in a motion if I'm moving to set a meeting?
Yeah, I think.
I would say okay, so let's say within the next month. How about that?
Sure.
For a working session, inviting Apurva Patel, and then also including, Jenny, this would be an action step, doing a large map. I don't know if you were able to see the maps that we did. Britt can let you know, and W.A. Fisher has.
I think W.A. Fisher must have been involved.
So, and then with those maps being brought to us for that working session. That would be my motion.
Okay, is there support for that?
Support.
Support by Councillor Beyondich. Councillor Jonathan, it has been moved and supported this to set up a working session within the next month to discuss our housing needs and how we're going to move forward. So that's the motion on the floor at this point. So it has been moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Friedlieb.
I think it's a great idea. I just don't know that I'm comfortable with Apurva being that person because he has vested interest in this already and could potentially be a conflict of interest in terms of what we're trying to accomplish because he would be the one that would be seeking to have that accomplished on his behalf potentially. I just don't see him as an independent consultant at this point in time, given that we've already approved a TIF financing for a project that he already has underway. So I'm a little concerned about that. I think he's a great person to tap into, but I don't know that he's the right person at this point in time, given how vested he already is in this community for ongoing projects that he's overseeing. So that's just my concern, and it doesn't have to be shared by the rest of us. And I may be completely mistaken when we find out that he's the perfect person for giving us the advice that we're looking for. But in any event, that's my initial concern, is that he's already vested with projects underway, and I don't know that we should be the one that's inviting him to do that on our behalf.
I think if the purpose of inviting Mr. Patel, and you could invite others as well, it doesn't have to be Mr. Patel, but he was just one of the individuals that was mentioned in the motion. I think it's good for us to be able to understand the terminology in that kind of world. What does a specific term mean? And I think he would be helpful in defining those as well. Councillor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to clarify, Councillor Friedlieb, I don't mean in any consultative fashion. I just mean a working session, informational working session.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. So thank you, Counselor Paulson. Thank you, Counselor Freelieb. It has been moved and supported to set up that working session within the next month to accommodate, and maybe we can invite other people to have that working session and talk about our next steps moving forward. Jenny, thank you very much for that presentation. It has been moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Anything else that we'd like to talk about now with respect to the housing study? Well, we're talking about housing, yeah, no other items, more on housing. Jenny?
Just to recap too, so we do have some of that land inventory still available that John had worked on. I don't know that much of it has actually changed, so I think that should be readily available. There's a couple other sites that I can think of, just off the top of my head, that might be worth exploring some options. They might be privately owned at this point, but I think just having the discussion, so that's all good information. And we can talk about it more in the working session, but yeah, I should be able to, I think it'll be a good working session based on some of that information. And then also, the League of Minnesota Cities has a wealth of information with definitions and tools to help the city. So I will provide more of that type of information too for that working session, so we can discuss all those options. And there may be availability for others to come in and present and talk to you about some of these terminologies and developments too. So I'll be doing research across the spectrum for all of that for you. So just wanted to let you know that.
Okay, thank
Mayor,
you.
if I may?
And I have, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for that. I don't want anybody coming in that has any type of lobbying, that they're not lobbying for something. I would be okay with them coming into a working session to have discussion, but not if they're going to be lobbying. I will not sit in with somebody like that. So I don't know how to make that clear.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
And so I would like to add that on a separate tangent, I know that you, Jenny, and Britt and staff have been working with some potential developers to develop some properties in the city of Virginia that may accommodate, a housing type of development. And as these discussions move forward and as you talk about these things, you'll come back to us with those recommendations. That might tie into housing in the future, but that information that's being, those meetings you're having will be helpful to us when we start discussing, the properties that are available. So when you provide us as properties, you could say, we have some interested parties in developing this property or that property or everything, and it's a potential. So those kind of things are part of that working session as well. So thank you, Jenny.
Can I add just one other thing before I forget, because I don't want to forget it.
Please do.
So it might be a good segue too to discuss at some future point updating the comprehensive plan, because there are goals and policies for housing within the comprehensive plan that I think align with the discussion that we're having. So just kind of planting that seed. It's not an outdated plan by any means, but it's always good to look, for those 5, 10, 20-year, 15, 20-year types of plans. So we've got a good one. It addresses some of these needs, but if we want to look to update that, that might be something else worth considering out of, all of this conversation, so.
And the recommendation is to review that comprehensive plan periodically to determine if you have to make any changes or adjustments to it, so.
A lot has changed since I think it's 2017 or 2019. A lot has changed even from 2021.
So, well, we look forward to your recommendations in having a meeting and some recommendations how we change our policy and discussion about that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. So it has been moved and supported. Is there any, we already voted on it? Okay, we already voted on it, so okay, fine. Anything else? Anybody has any questions on before we adjourn the special council meeting? Seeing none, we will adjourn to our next meeting, which is scheduled for 5 p.m. on a public hearing. We stand adjourned on this special meeting. Do we have, okay, we stand adjourned. Thank you.